Hello, and welcome to a special live reading by Canadian horror author Nancy Kilpatrick. My name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and I'm honored to have in the virtual studio with me. We have the similar decor behind us. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
What are you going to be treating us with today?
This is actually a short story, and it's called Cold Comfort. And I guess I'll just get to it as usual, huh?
Excellent. I'm going to put you in the spotlight. And no, that's me in the spotlight. Let's put you in the spotlight. Let's drag you into the spotlight. No, okay. Tech issues. Why is this not working? All right. Let's my apologies. Let's go back here. I'm going to move us, and then I'm going to put you in the spotlight. Wow. Here we go. There you go. I was just letting you get warmed up there, Nancy.
Okay. So this is a story called Cold Comfort, and I'm going to read it on the Kindle. Hopefully this all works out again. James felt caught by the frozen tension of a Montreal winter. He lingered in the hotel dining room over a late meal, tired, but not sleepy. As he downed his drink, he decided on a walk before heading to bed. As James left the hotel, icy air wounded him. He adjusted the collar of his gray wool coat. Head bowed, he moved west toward the lights of Rue Crescent. Snowdrifts lining the gutter had frozen into dirty mounds that would be difficult but not impossible to scale. He hoped the full force of the storm would hold off until after his departure. Few cars moved along the street, bereft of pedestrians. While walking, James focused on an enormous machine noisily eating its way through the impacted ice of the mounds. As the slow-moving monster consumed solids, it excreted only a dribble of liquid from its opposite end. Transformation took place deep within its gargantuan belly, hidden, and it surprised James, who prided himself on rarely indulging in idle speculation, that he was questioning the process. His thoughts shifted to demographics and target markets. Glancing at his watch, he pictured Millie and the boys skating at the community rink. He hoped she had remembered to take the car in for winterizing. A sharp wind demanded awareness of his surroundings. He heard what sounded like a hinge squeaking and turned his head. Amid the glow of imaginative displays and brightly lit shop windows, a darkened doorway stood out. He suspected this was where the noise originated. When Arctic air slashed his cheek, interest in the noise faded. Tomorrow's a busy day, he reminded himself. I'd better head back. Again the squeak and his impulse to look. He heard other sounds emitted from the blackness, reminiscent of a primitive language. He thought he could make out the words "l'échange." "L'échange," he echoed, insecure about his French. He glanced behind, afraid to be discovered talking to himself. "Change," a voice said in perfect English. "You know." A tremor of stupidity passed through James. Gusts of snow eroded that feeling, buffeting him until he could barely keep balanced. When the current shifted, he faced the doorway, eyes narrowed. "You mean you want money?" A wind stilled, and another sound reached his ears. Bark crackling in fire, a scalp being scratched, raspy laughter. Through swirling snow, he watched a hand emerge from the darkness, palm up. Each split finger of the glove revealed soiled flesh. The hand withdrew so quickly, it was as though it had never existed. James knew that at home he would not be exposed in this way. Street people, he had convinced himself, are a city phenomenon, regulated by the downtown core, where life congeals. On the rare occasions when he encountered them, business trips and vacations, he usually crossed the street, avoiding contact. He felt as much responsibility as anyone. There were places for the unfortunate, organizations to help. He contributed to charities. Once his wife drove half an hour into the city, taking a bag of canned goods to a food bank after hearing a plea on the radio. "I'm not cold-hearted," he assured himself, "but you have to draw the line somewhere." "I suppose you want it for coffee or a sandwich," he said, feeling uncomfortable, wondering why he was talking to this person. A rumble distracted him. Another machine turned the corner, bulky, oddly tentacled, tires large and deep-threaded. Methodically, it sprayed salt crystals along the ice-slick asphalt. He watched as the awkward vehicle lumbered through the turn, struggling to reestablish traction. Coffee? Don't touch the stuff. James shivered and stamped his feet. His gut constricted. Trapped between instincts, he was paralyzed for several moments until he heard, "Not food, neither." "You want it for alcohol." Paralysis gave way to savagery. Quickly, James glanced left, then right. De Maisonneuve was still empty. "Nope, not booze." A long-forgotten feeling surfaced. He was being toyed with. He felt brushed by madness. "There's still work to do," he nodded to himself. "Tomorrow's going to be hectic." Sleep beckoned. He turned and began walking east, but before snow had crunched under both feet, he heard, "It's this book I gotta read." Incredulous, James turned back. He stared at the blackened building entrance, but still could discern nothing. A bus drove close to the curb, splashing slush. He peered into 8 passing windows, 8 rectangular eyes, inviting him to view a contained world. 2 pale, heavily bundled figures, resigned to the elements, sat at opposite ends of the vehicle. When the bus was gone and silence restored, James glanced down, annoyed to find the bottom of his coat stained. "Cost $12.95 new," came the scratchy voice, "but it's an old story." "You're a derelict. Why am I talking to you?" His voice boomed in his ears. As James restrained himself from going further, again the cold seeped in. "Andrea around the block's got it used for $5.50. The unwanted explanation had an odd effect. A glacial force threatened to engulf him. A soft groan slipped from between his chilly lips. "I'm done, étranger." Étranger? What? The Stranger? By Camus? James was afraid to hear more. Quickly he pulled off one glove and reached into his coat pocket. "I won't give you all of it." He had intended the words as controlled, justifiably gruff, but they hung in the air like plastic icicles, cheap and silly. "Why should I subsidize your reading?" he grumbled. "Go to the library if you want a book." He opened his wallet, sorted through bills, finding a 5 and a 10, plucking out the former. With his vulnerable hand, he extended the money, aware his skin was freezing. The hand reached out again from darkness into illumination, followed by an arm, only to the elbow, and James fell back. Rotted coat sleeve, matted fabric adhering to wrist and palm, ancient gnarled fingers, 3 bare to the knuckles, quivering, gritty, jagged nails. Fingers snatched the money. Although alien flesh had barely touched his numb fingers, James was grateful for the temporary loss of feeling. He watched the arm, the hand, and finally the bill vanish into the shadows. Quickly he shoved his numbed flesh back into the leather glove, then under his armpit, hugging himself. Alarmed by reviving sensation, he wanted comfort. Maybe he would hail a taxi back to the hotel. The street was devoid of life. Now he felt foolish, gullible, allowing himself to become upset. What possessed me, he wondered, shaking his head. Quickly James turned from the doorway, muttering, "That will have to do," and hurried away, unaccountably relieved that no gratitude had been shown. Even before daybreak, the storm ended. Montreal's snowy streets glistened in the blinding sun. Cars and pedestrians crowded the downtown, re-injecting vitality into the city. With a good night's sleep to carry him through, James was off early to meetings that lasted the morning and much of the busy afternoon. Twice during the day, he astonished himself by idly speculating about the book. Of course, he had read The Outsider when he was at university, but he could not recall what it was about, only that he'd left it unfinished. He checked out of the hotel, ate a hurried late lunch at a coffee bar. If he caught the 5 o'clock flight, he could be home by 8. That night, safe in his own bed, Millie snuggled close, the boys asleep down the hall, James jolted awake. His heart rammed his chest wall, threatening to explode. Hot sweat coated his trembling body, and the finger flesh of his right hand burned. Layers of sweltering shadow wrapped his world in unfamiliarity. He did not recognize this woman lying beside him. He did not recognize himself. He walked to the bedroom closet and unlocked the metal box. He then sat on the chair facing the bed, the loaded handgun shifting its aim as his hand pivoted. The barrel pointed up toward his face, then straight ahead toward the bed. Up, straight, up, straight. He focused on two truths. He longed for the numbing, but he understood with crystal clarity that the future would not be like the past. He would never again know such a cold comfort. And
Wow. That's quite a bit different than some of the Nancy Kilpatrick stories that I'm used to. What was the? Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
yeah, I've read a lot of books in my life, not necessarily horror, but I read a lot of horror too. And I've had phases, like a Russian, classic Russian phase. And I read for a period of time in my youth, I read a lot of existential writing. And I like the existentialists a lot, Camus, Albert Camus, and André Gide, and Sartre, and there were others. And I read that stuff, and it resonated for me. So at some point in my life, as a writer, when I actually started writing, I thought I'd like to try some of that myself. And this story had a different version. Initially, it was didn't have the gun at the end. It was more of a philosophical or an esoteric kind of ending.
Right.
But I wanted to change it into a horror story because by then I had moved into definitely, back to horror, as it were, back to black. And yeah, so there were a number of stories that I'd written in that time frame where I was doing this sort of existential expression, and I managed to what actually propelled me to do this was one story in particular that I wrote because I had a couple of sort of lit stories published, lit, commercial lit and all that, and
Yeah.
that kind of realm. And I had one story that when I used to live in Toronto, the Toronto Star in the past, I guess, had a short story contest every year, and people would send in stories, and I had a story that was, because I thought I should be more of a literary writer as opposed to a horror writer. Thought I don't know, I think school does this to you. They always get you to read O. Henry and everything. Anyway, so I sent in a story, and it was a runner-up in the contest. So it appeared in the newspaper. And so as I'm perusing my story that I wrote, I thought, my God, this is really a horror story. The story is about the way I wrote it initially was about incest, and then I turned it into this horror story. It's now a vampire story. It's called Root Cellar, which has been published many times, and it's somehow people really like this as a horror story. And actually, I was going to show you this too. One of the first big anthologies that I was in was this best of anthology by Carl Wagner, who was one of the major anthologists who did a best of every year. There was also Stephen Jones in England and Ellen Dotlow. And so Carl Wagner, he bought that story, and it's in this book. How do I get this straight on what I'm doing? Okay, it's in this book, and he was a wonderful editor because he actually I don't know, he worked with authors. I didn't have to revise the story for him, but he was very encouraging. And if anybody out there is a writer, you ever get an editor who is encouraging to you, just hang on to that person. He ended up buying 3 stories from me for 3 different best of anthologies. And it really helped my career tremendously, for that. But my point is that before this, I had not published this particular story, Cold Comfort, and it was one of these sort of existential stories, kind of like the Root Cellar was. And so I put together a collection, which is this, called Cold Comfort, because that story is in this book. And it's the only unpublished story. All the rest are reprints have been published here and there and elsewhere. And
Right.
I often think people can't, they don't run into your stories very easily, especially if they're in smaller, obscure publications. This book in particular is all horror stories. It's nothing to do with vampires, in case anybody's wondering. But it's also out of print. It's a beautiful book. I'll hold it up again because I like it so much. I like the cover of it. I like the whole look of it. This is the back of it. And it was done by a publishing house called Dark Tales. I think I mentioned it another time in another reading. And they did. It's so beautiful inside. Everything about it is just really, really nice. And so they published this and went out of business the same day as it
Oh
came out.
no.
So that was the end of that. So the book really didn't get distributed except for a few reviewers' copies, and so there's reviews for a book no one has ever seen.
Oh man.
But
Can,
yeah, so that story is in there, and that's the only place it is. But you can't get the book, so it is nowhere.
wow. Except here now during this free reading that people
Yeah,
can check
yeah.
out. So I want to dig back into the ending of Cold Comfort, because you said you modified the ending to make it a horror story, and if anyone's watching who is not a horror reader, they probably have a misperception of what the horror genre is, because a lot of it's informed by film and movies, the very popular, Halloween and Friday the 13th and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But this is a very quiet, understated, it's like you're implying a bunch of things
Hmm.
that you're letting the reader intuit. Now, can you talk a little bit about the value or the importance of that kind of quiet horror?
There's a lot of writers who like to write in the quiet way. One of the most famous was Charles L. Grant, and he was known as a quiet horror writer, and his stuff is great. And it's got that. It leaves you more with the human element, as opposed to the slam bam, thank you ma'am kind of horror, which is the very, it's in your face, it's visceral, there's that. It's a certain type of horror, it's not bad. And, that's the serial killers and the crazies, and all of that. And then there's the supernatural ones, werewolves and vampires and so on. But when you get into the sort of almost the psychology or the spiritual problems of a person, that's what this is about. It's left to the reader to see it if they identify with any aspect of it, and what it means to them. So in this story, obviously, it's a very ordinary man with an ordinary, he's got a life, he's got a family, he's got kids, they go ice skating, he goes business trips here and there, and probably lives in the suburbs and has what he thinks is a wonderful life. But I see it as a story, and I see this type of writing as synchronistic, because I'm using the term in the sort of psychological way, I guess the Carl Jung psychological way, where our inner reality, however we want to define that, and people do define it differently. One is unconscious and all of that, but there's many ways to look at what am I, who am I, what is this in me. When there is something within us that aligns perfectly with something outside of us, that is synchronistic. Because we don't have a lot of synchronistic moments. Yes, we have times when we feel good, we have a great time, it's all fun. That's not the same thing. This is when something, it's that phrase, a crease in time, a crack in time, where something, it's almost as though reality has split and something comes that you have not expected, and it affects you because you've lined up, the outside and the inside has lined up, and it creates a vibration almost that gets to you, and that's the synchronicity of it. So that's kind of how I see this story, and I see it a lot of the quieter horror is like that, because it's showing a character who is uh, reacting to the environment, almost fighting the environment in a way, trying to keep it at bay, but can't, because we
Right.
can't.
and impacted in a deeply internal, personal way, um, which is, yeah. Wow. Great story. Thank you for sharing that. Can you let people who are watching, listening to this, know where they can find out more about you and check out your books that are available for purchase?
Yeah, I have lots of books that are available. I have a website. If you just type in, there it is. Well, that's not it. That's my email address. But if you
Oops.
type in just Nancy Kilpatrick as a search engine, you will get a www, which is my website. So you can go there. I'm on Facebook. I'm sort of on Twitter, on Instagram. I don't really have a blog anymore. You can find my books on Goodreads. You can find my books on Amazon. You can do searches and all that stuff. I have lots of books. I'm happy if you want to buy one. That would be great.
Ask for your books at our local library as well, too, right?
They are, yeah. They should be
Yeah.
at the library, and they're in various forms. You can get them not just at Amazon. If you are a Kobo reader, you can get them through Kobo. So, or in the States, I guess it's Nook. If Nook
Nook
still
or
exists.
Apple, I imagine they're available on all the
Yeah, yeah,
major
they should be everywhere.
platforms.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for entertaining us with this wonderful reading tonight.
Well, thank you for being here, Mark, and I very much appreciate you as always. Your great effort with the tech. I must thank also the Canada Council for sponsoring the readings through the auspices of the Writers Union of Canada. And I have one more reading to go, so yes, you'll have to bear with me out there. You can hear me one more time.
Awesome. It's something for us to look forward to. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Good night.